So
cool. All right, awesome. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for having us. My name is Zach Sadiq. I work at the Arc of King County as the Disability Systems Navigation Coordinator. And, one of my favorite things to do is talk about all matters related to disability. So whenever folks are, willing to invite us to talk about everything disability related, I always just jump at the chance. And Jay's laughing right now. She knows how true it is. So a little about me. I'm autistic. Been so since the day I was born, and it's really just like flavored everything about me and about my life. And so, I might share a little of my story if the panelists, aren't, and everything about, this is like personal for me, the experiences I've been through. And I'm also a community organizer, so I hear a lot of stories from other autistic folks and folks with developmental disabilities. So there's often shared experiences, sometimes good and sometimes bad. And, panels like this are really powerful at, just showing like the wealth of experiences out there and also reflecting on, what might need to change, what's going great now, and what maybe could be going a little better. So I'm really grateful for the panelists who are willing to share their experiences and help move the needle on the system a little. So I guess with all of that being said, let's jump into the first question, which is tell us about yourself. What are the things you want the audience to know about you, and why did you decide to participate on this panel? Devin, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi everyone, I am Devin Allen. I have Down syndrome and it's not contagious. And the one thing that you know about me is that I am really determined and self-sufficient. And why I wanted to participate is because I want to share my story with everyone in this panel right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Devin. What about Jay? You want to go next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jay, a supervisor of information and referral at the Arc of King County, where we support people with disabilities and their families. I have a disability and use a communication device to talk. Because of my disability, I'm passionate about talking to the community about disability. My role is to help individuals to live their lives how they want to. I live in Melmish and I graduated from the Sequoia High School about 9 years ago. I just aged myself. I graduated from University of Washington 3 years ago with a master's degree in social work. I'm on this panel because education is one of my interested areas.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Great to have you here as always. And last but not least, we have Daniel. Hello, Daniel.
Hello. All right, my name is Daniel Idelson. I have autism spectrum disorder, and I was never diagnosed with it, but likely ADHD. So I graduated from the University of Washington in December of 2019 with a bachelor's in geography and urban planning, and maybe at the worst possible time to graduate college because the pandemic hit a few months later. And in addition to that, pile on, the mental health challenges I've had to deal with, and it's been a difficult time. But one of the main reasons I'm here is because I really care about those that are struggling with challenges, such as the ones that I deal with, and others that have autism and other, various challenges that people have to deal with. And I want to help, and I want to offer my voice and speak up for those who otherwise may not be able to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. Glad to have you here. All right. Well, and I guess before we jump into the next question, I just want to say, we want this panel to be as relevant to, whatever y'all are going through with your lives right now. So if you ever have a question you want the panel to answer, please feel free to type it in chat. And if it's especially like connected to what the panel is currently talking about, I might pivot to that question instead of the next planned question. So yeah, feel free to type it in chat. And we may or may not have Q&A time at the end of the panel. So we'll see, depending on how much Jay talks anyway. So let's jump to the next question, which is where/when did you go to school? What district were you in? And what kind of classes were you in? And I realized I should appoint someone to go first. How about you, Daniel, since you're the only one unmuted?
Okay. So the question was what school district I went to. I grew up in San Diego, California. So obviously the district that I went to school in is not probably any that you would be familiar with. I think for elementary school, I was in the Del Mar Union school district. And then for middle school and high school, I was in the San Diego Union High School District. So probably not any districts that I expect you guys to have any familiarity with. And then in terms of what classes I was in, I was mostly in normal classes. I was mainstreamed. The resource managers at the school tried to make sure that I was mainstreamed as early as possible. And yeah, but I did have a couple support classes that I took, and I did have an IEP. And so I did have, individualized supports, but I also was in a mostly mainstream environment.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Devin, what about you?
For me, I did 6th and 7th grade in Michigan. I'm originally from Michigan, from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast, but
no, you're doing good.
Okay. Cool. So my first part is when I did 6th and 7th grade in Michigan, and that was a fully inclusive environment. And then I finished 8th grade here in Seattle at Exton Middle School, which was also so inclusive. But they never really graded my work. They only put like one of those stickers with a smiley face on it. So my work was never graded. And then I graduated from Estarán, and then I moved on to high school, to Nathan Hale High School. And my 9th grade year was I felt like an outsider for my first year in high school, because some of my teachers were great, but some of my teachers were not supportive. And there's only one teacher that actually really stood out for me, who went that extra mile for me and actually believed in me when no one else did. So basically, and I live in the 46th district now, but everything should be great.
Awesome, thank you. And if I can ask a follow-up question, when you say that like teacher really like stuck up for you where none of the others did, like what did that look like?
It felt like he actually wanted me to learn in the class, but for my other teachers didn't really graded my work. They only so the disadvantages of my disability and not really my abilities to begin with. But some teachers helped me to my level of learning and not really seeing above that. But it's just only that one teacher. He was my science teacher, and he actually wanted me to learn in the class, but also he was the only one who actually believed in me when no one else did.
Well, I'm glad you had a teacher who did believe in you, and it's unfortunate that it sounds like many of the other teachers just judged you based on your disability and what they thought sort of like the stories they had heard of like people with Down syndrome and, some of the myths that are out there.
Mhm.
So, Jay, what about you? Have you had similar experiences as Devin has had?
I was in this school district since 4th grade. The school that I was placed in decided to put me in a special education class, LRC2, and I stayed in LRC2 until high school. They didn't evaluate me based on my knowledge. They assumed that I was able to learn like any other student due to my disabilities. Teachers had me play games or watch movies that were about life skills. I barely did academic work. I remember we had a circle time where we talked about things like which day was it. Although LRC2 taught me a variety of things, such as how to be independent and do things by myself, I unknowingly lost a chance to learn, and it feels like I had a hole in my education. I also wasn't given a communication device until 9th grade, and I needed to point to each letter on the tray board. It was very frustrating because it was a really slow process, as people would have guessed what I wanted to say after pointing to a few letters. It would have been so much easier if I had a communication device earlier. When I had subs for my aides, they thought that I was acting out. They didn't allow me, and I tend to move my body wildly as I'm doing something due to my disability.
It's unfortunate. So it sounds like you still had some very similar experiences to Devin. I'm glad you finally were able to get, a good communication device, but it's also, really frustrating that it took, like 9 years of education before that finally was arranged. And it also makes me wonder, like how many other students are there, in the school districts like you who, just haven't gotten the right communication supports, and folks assume that they're less capable of learning than they actually are. It, brings to mind the phrase, non-speaking doesn't mean non-thinking. But unfortunately, it seems like that is a very prevalent problem right now, I'll say. And probably for me, it's probably one of the biggest human rights crises in like the autistic community, and also for many other folks with disabilities as well. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at. So for me, I grew up in Western Colorado, in a town called, Grand Junction, Colorado. Really great like hiking and mountain biking around there. But I was always the kid who just like staying indoors, playing video games. And, growing up, I didn't really know anyone else like me. Like my dad was probably also autistic, but he was really the only one. So it was just hard to relate to some of the other students. And like I was pretty much entirely in like mainstream classes, actually, yeah, always in mainstream classes. And, the message I always received was like, since I was so like quote unquote high functioning, and I hate that term for a variety of different reasons, like, my autism wasn't going to be a problem at all. And I could do anything I wanted to. And I sort of like internalized that right up until I was fired from my first 2 jobs after college. And then I realized like, hey, like there's a reason there's a like 80% unemployment rate in the autism world. And it's not just on the autistic folks. Like there's got to be a lot of changes to workplace cultures to really be inclusive for us. And that's not really something at all my school district prepared me for, and not even something I think they were really aware of as well. Yeah, so I would probably rant about that more, but we've got more questions to go through. So the next question we have is, did you have an IEP? Did you know if you had an IEP? Do you feel like the goals on the IEP helped you? If you had one, were you allowed to advocate for yourself in IEP meetings? And let's see, Jay, you want to go first? Yeah, you knew it.
My IEP was based on my performances, like how many social problems I got right or how many words I could type in 10 minutes. I don't remember that I had a transition plan because my parents and I were never asked what we wanted to work on. However, I attended to all my IEP meetings, listened to the team, or added my thoughts because I got old enough and I was a kid who didn't want to do what I didn't like. I advocated for what I wanted or needed starting in 8th grade. My teachers and transition specialists listened to what I needed to say and tried to support me with it. This was because I wasn't a student who sat back and did what my teachers told me to do. After talking to my transition specialist, and I decided to go to college, my IEP by then was focused on my graduation requirements because I needed adjustments as I couldn't take art language classes and took other classes instead.
Well, I'm definitely glad you did have, some say in your IEP. I'm sure it was unlikely you did before, 8th grade, before you got those communication devices. And I mean, even then, and I know it might take you a while to respond, so I can jump to the next person while you're typing it out. Like, did you know like what an IEP was, or like, really like what special education was? Like before 8th grade? Oh, you're shaking your head no. Okay, so really like there wasn't very much involvement whatsoever. Yeah, that's frustrating. And I can definitely imagine why. That's probably why you really wanted to do things yourself. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. All right, Devin, looks like you're unmuted, so you can go next.
For me, at first I didn't know I had an IEP, but once I got a bit older, I began to be more involved in my IEP meetings, and then I went to the IEP meetings and started to advocate for myself. So doing those, and those goals were definitely helpful to actually see and to actually to grow and improve on those goals. But also, they also allowed me to advocate for myself when I needed to have my say in the meetings.
Awesome. Well, it's good you were able to advocate for yourself. I know that's something a lot of folks are not often allowed. And, knowing you, you've always been someone who's very good at advocating. So I'm glad you had those opportunities there. Do you feel like when you did advocate, like the advocacy was listened to?
Oh, definitely yes.
Cool. If I can probe further, like what were examples of like things you advocated for?
I advocated for my rights, but also for the education system. I was able to have a say in the classes that I chose, but also I had the right to be able to speak up for myself in the meetings too.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, that is such an interesting thing to think about, and not something I did before, but yeah, like, students, especially in high school, do have some choices about like what kinds of things they can learn, what kinds of classes they can take. And that is not often something that's, afforded to students who are in special education classrooms. And then, reading Jay's comments that she assumed every student was learning the same stuff as she did, like, it just shows like how, I guess how depressing like that separation is, where, it feels like a lot of students with disabilities are often just sequestered in, our own little worlds and not really afforded opportunities to, have contact with the greater world. And to me, it also reminds me almost of like institutions and how there's that similar dynamic in like, external control of like where folks live, what they choose to do each day, who they're able to do the things with. And so it's, hadn't really thought about that connection before, but it's an interesting one. So Daniel, what about you?
Yes, I did have an IEP. I did know that I had an IEP from a relatively early age. As soon as I, realized that I was a bit different than the other kids, I I talked to my parents about that, and they did say that I had an IEP, and I think that would have been around second or third grade, but I had it, I mean, since kindergarten. So I had it the entire way.
And if I can interrupt and ask, like, did you know you were autistic, or like even what autism was at that point, or did they not tell you?
I'm trying to remember. I first learned about autism, and then I had it when I was probably about 11 or 12. So I knew I was different, but I didn't know how I was different. And yeah, so did the goals on my IEP help me? They did, you know, it was relatively individualized. I mean, obviously I was in, you know, elementary school almost 20 years ago. And so I mean, the supports, they aren't good enough now. They certainly weren't good enough then. But, you know, they were trying, they were trying, you know, and I got to give them credit for that. But it's just, there was, you know, my brain just functioned differently, but based on what they could see on the outside, they tried to individualize it the best way that they could while still mainstreaming me into, you know, classes. And it was quite difficult. You know, there were times I just wanted to give up. I wanted to have like something easier, but they kept pushing, and it was sort of like a double-edged sword. You know, it helped me, you know, like have more, you know, connections going forward, but it also caused me to constantly have to mask my symptoms and lose touch with who I was. And so really it was kind of like a, not really a net negative or a net positive, but if anything, I'd say it might be more of a net negative. Well, let's see.
When you say like mask your symptoms, like what does that mean specifically?
Masking my symptoms, basically it's just pretending that I don't have autism, like acting neurotypical, and you know, just not you know, not being naturally who I am, because I did that for much of my you know, early childhood, and I would often you know, often get bullied and excluded because of it. So I eventually learned, you know, not to you know, sort of take the edge off of my personality. And I had a lot more social success that way. I mean, my confidence was better, but it also was really difficult because I didn't really even know who I was as a consequence. And then I think I was pretty young when most of my IEP meetings took place. So I'm not really sure if I was allowed to advocate for myself. I may have. My memory is definitely foggy. I mean, if I was in an IEP meeting, I probably didn't know that I was in an IEP meeting, but I definitely was allowed to advocate for myself, but maybe not as much as I would have liked to. You know, maybe I think there was, you know, sort of just this deference to the adults in that situation, you know, which unfortunately often happens. And as a result, you know, sometimes my voice wasn't always heard. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I can definitely relate to that with my own experience as well. So for me, no, I don't think I really knew I had an IEP until I was maybe in middle school or high school. You know, like I wasn't diagnosed as, you know, being on the spectrum until I was around 11. And, you know, before then, you know, whenever I had a meltdown or acted out or, you know, was just really too sassy for the teacher to handle, I would often be, you know, kicked out of class or suspended. And that probably happened, probably close to 15 times by fourth grade. And that's when I was finally diagnosed. And, you know, since I was in a rural area, they had to fly out a psychiatrist from Denver to do the evaluations. And, you know, they had to fly them out like 2 or 3 times. So just interesting to think about how much that probably costed the school district and why, maybe one of the reasons why it didn't necessarily happen earlier. And so, you know, I didn't really, like, I always knew I was different. I didn't really always think about, you know, why that was. I think in some ways it's similar to what Jay said earlier. You know, I thought like most students, if not all students, were going through the same thing. And it never really clicked for me until middle school. And middle school is just a whole beast in and of itself. Yeah, so, you know, basically, you know, I said this earlier, like the message I got was, since I'm so high functioning, like I would be fine. And so similar to Daniel, I was just taught to like mask or hide my autistic traits for the benefit and the comfort of the non-autistic people around me, you know, no matter what the cost was to me. And you know, I realized, similar to Daniel, it just led to a really sort of like an authentic identity. I couldn't really be who I was. I was always taught that like I have to put others' needs above my own. And, it's an interesting experience. Like when you have a visible disability like Devin or Jay, like people seems like will really assume that, they're not really capable of doing much and, don't deserve to have, their self-determination or the ability to make choices. But when, you have an invisible disability like Daniel or I, people assume since we don't look disabled and maybe we don't act disabled or really that, whatever that means, we can do things in the same way as, all of the apparent non-disabled people around us. And we sort of receive this like social pressure to do so, no matter what the cost is for us. And, just thinking about my experiences with an IEP meetings, like I think I first started attending them high school, maybe only 2 or 3, and I was always at odds with what my parents thought. But they just went with what when I say they, I mean like the special education team just went with what my parents recommended, and didn't necessarily respect my goals too much. It didn't really ultimately matter anyway, because I always felt like I was still on like the special education roster just so the school district could get additional funding. Like I maybe saw like, someone from the special education side of things, maybe like once or twice a quarter. And even then, not very much. And so really like whatever I advocated for didn't really matter in the long run. So yeah, I mean, I read the IEPs. I didn't really know what they were about. And, hard to say I could do really meaningful advocacy just based on that, total lack of information. Yeah. So before we jump to the next question, I just wanted to see if there's like any audience questions right now. See what y'all are thinking. Oh, hello, Shoreline Special Needs PTSA.
I should change my name. Well, I should keep my name. I should let you all know what it is. My question had to do with some of you, Devin and Jay, had time in special education classes and time in mainstream classes. And I was curious about, I'm especially thinking about our district is moving in that direction for all students. So I guess I'm curious if you had advice for us about what made that work well when you got into those classes.
Well, for me, I did, and for me in high school, I did half of special ed, in the mornings, and then in the afternoons, I was independent and I was in mainstream classes. But my 9th grade year, I was in just in mainstream classes, and they didn't really grade in my work. But for advice, I would have to say, just to trust and believe in yourself, because I know that is a big, broader advice that we need to have in the school district, is to just believe in yourself and to push through those, and just let the doubters doubt. So don't be afraid to put your dream in action.
If I can ask a follow-up question to that, what allowed you to believe in yourself, Devin?
Well, for me, I actually had to fight, actually, when I first moved here. Me and my parents had to fight with the Seattle public school system, because they only looked at my disability and not my abilities. So I was able to advocate for myself by drawing a picture of where I was moving from and where I was moving to. So they realized that that I wasn't going to fit that mold of what they want me to be. So I broke the mold and break those chains and moved into a more inclusive society. for myself. And that's when I started to have that spark of advocacy, but also I had the opportunity to believe in myself to take it even more further.
I can definitely, yeah, I can relate to that, in some regards. Like nothing like, having to fight the school systems to really give a chip on your shoulder and turn you into a social worker later in life, right?
Yeah.
So Jay said it made harder for me in the long run. I needed to catch up. Yeah, and so Jay had to, like, what you got your communication device 9th grade, so that's like 9 grades you had to catch up on within 4 years, plus those like next 4 years, in order to graduate in time, which I think, did you graduate on time? Or you did? Okay. Yeah, so definitely probably took a lot of effort. I'm glad it finally happened.
I also graduated on time too. I graduated
That's awesome.
from high school in 2015.
Awesome.
Then I graduated college in 2017.
Cool. Yeah, and I know Jay had a similar timeline for college as well. I think it was 4 years and then just another year for social work, right? Yeah, because you were an advanced standing student. Cool. Awesome. Well, love the answer so far. The next question we have is, how would you have wished that your high school would have prepared you better for life after graduation? I can get really salty on that question, so I want to see if one of y'all want to take it first. You want to go on this, Daniel?
Ooh.
And I'm sure whatever you're saying is great, but
Sorry,
you're also muted.
My bad. I didn't know that I was muted. Yeah, there are just so many ways that my high school could have done a better job of preparing me for graduation or for life after graduation that, honestly, I can't think of them all, but to name a few, I mean, really just figuring out who I want to be in life, what kind of jobs I want to look for, what kind of goals I want for myself, the kind of relationships I want to form. And I mean, obviously, me as an autistic individual, it really didn't help to be left out in the cold like that. But virtually everybody's left out in the cold like that, whether you have a disability or not. And I think that's just, a testament to how incredibly and horrifically broken the school system is, and how much fixing it needs. But really, it's just doing a better job of getting me to know my skills and how I can best be successful in life. And I constantly hear that from everybody that I talk to about it, disabled or not disabled. But definitely it's greatly aggravated when someone is disabled, like myself or like Devin or like Jay.
Yeah. What about you, Devin?
For me, I think my high school did a pretty good job at preparing me for life after graduation, but though I still have had a couple of teachers that didn't really help me to my level. But also I had that one teacher that really went that extra mile for me, which really was helpful to help me guide me along the way down this path of greatness and success in my life. But I also wanted there's only I have a quote saying that the biggest obstacle was other people's doubts, because that is the most famous thing I had said at the White House. Yes, I did go to the White House, but not to brag, but that was the most better thing for me to say, because other people's doubts, my biggest obstacle was other people's doubts because they didn't see that I was capable of doing these things, or they didn't see they only saw my disability and not my abilities. So I wanted them to see my abilities and my capabilities, so I can be able to move forward with that and leave and let the doubters doubt, and don't be afraid of what they're going to say.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. When you have a disability, other people will definitely say things that are, well-meaning, but then also come across as like really strange, or interesting, polite way to put it.
And all of those stuff gave me strength to carry on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Nothing like, little doubt to just raise the anger and make it easier for you to focus and work. That's for sure. So Jay wrote, I wish they prepare me for college or reality rather than teaching me how to type faster. Well, what about teaching you to tell like what day it is? Are you glad they taught you that? Okay. What about counting change? Yeah, the joke with that is like, we're all in social work because we're not good at math. That is proven to be a stereotype. That's true. That's for sure. So for me, like, it's a good question. And oh yeah, there's so many ways to go answer this. I think, on the one hand, like it's impossible to know like what adulthood's going to be like or life after graduation is going to be like, even like a year before, because no one could predict something like COVID or, like a stock market crash or, uh, many other like big or small changes that might impact what you should, what would be useful for you to know after graduation. But, with that being said, even with non-disabled students, there's still some things that a lot of my teachers said that turned out to be completely false. Like, if I had $1 for every time one of my math teachers said, you're never going to, carry a calculator with you everywhere you go around when you're an adult. And, now it's just like, hey, we've probably got like 3 or 4 calculators on us with our cell phones or computers. And so, I really didn't need to learn like long form, division or like, geometry or trigonometry. I just had to know really like how to get the answers in, the most efficient way, which also, brings to mind the whole, well, when you're an adult, like you're not going to, when your boss asks you to turn something in on a specific date, like you're going to have to do that. We're just preparing you for that. And, as adults, we could just email our bosses and be like, hey, I'm running into these barriers. Could I, turn this in a couple days late? And, most good bosses are, okay with that. Or there's the whole like, Americans with Disabilities Act, which could impact, all of that as well. And that's not necessarily something the teachers were aware of or what, or considered. And then, thinking about disabled students, we essentially get taught to live lives in a non-disabled way for most of us, especially those of us with invisible disabilities. And so there's this fixation on doing things this one specific way, like writing numbers a specific way, not having too many squiggly lines on your 8s, for examples. And, when you're an adult, like people aren't going to care about that. Or just thinking about like group projects, they're supposed to prepare us for like how to, work with our coworkers. And, I would say the group projects were so much worse than working with coworkers. That's turned out to be true. I think though, what I definitely noticed was like the lack of sort of like institutional knowledge of like what it's like to live as a disabled person was really prevalent in my school district. So they didn't know like what kinds of barriers I might run into as an adult. They wouldn't know like how ableism, would impact me in my life as an adult, or how it would impact my ability to make, find jobs. And so I feel like the system fails a lot of people in similar ways, whether it be like race or, like sexual orientation or, socioeconomic status. But it seems like just with the way the education system is, it really, like there's this sort of like cookie cutter mold that we're sort of expected to turn out as. And maybe it helps some folks, but doesn't really help, everyone, and especially those from other like marginalized backgrounds and communities as well. So yeah, I forget. Did everyone answer that question? I think so. Right? Yeah, cool. Jay said group projects in the worst. Jay, I could not imagine being in a group project with you. I laugh as we work on a lot of projects together. Yeah. Cool. Well, great questions. Oh, we've got another question. Cool. As a high school parent, how much do you think we should be involved in our students' decision making? How can we be supportive versus talking over or making decisions for our students? Yeah, that's a great one. I think I'll jump into this one first, actually. So, I mean, first I'll say it depends on like, do you have the same disability as your kid does? You know, that'll definitely impact how you see things and how you might evaluate the benefits of certain decisions. You know, oftentimes non-disabled folks don't realize the cost that comes to disabled folks for doing tasks in a specific way or accomplishing things in a specific order, and they don't consider like how much energy it will take, and they won't, you know, they might not know what like the spoon theory of disabilities is, or how that impacts, you know, how we live our lives or how we decide how to do these projects. So I think the first really important thing is learning, you know, making sure you're paying attention to what's going on in like the specific disability community your kid's from, whether it be, you know, paying attention to like what adults with Down syndrome are saying, or, you know, autistic adults, or, you know, folks with other similar identities can be really useful for evaluating decisions. But I will say one of the biggest things I see, you know, I've also worked in like community mental health agencies, and I often see this dynamic where like the parents were historically blamed for the mistakes their kids made, and they sort of like take on this like rescuer or helper role as a way to avoid that blame. And it, you know, leads to dynamics where the kids aren't necessarily allowed to learn or grow or make mistakes by anyone, and it results in ultimately a loss of independence or sometimes a failure to thrive. So it's a really fine line though, and it's, you know, I think, you know, as parents, like it's okay to make mistakes just as long as, you know, doesn't hurt the kids too much, and that, you know, parents are often blamed for so many things, and yeah, it is a real tightrope. I don't know, do any of you have anything else to add to that? Devin, Daniel, Jay?
Yeah, I think you kind of have to walk a fine line on that. I mean, obviously, it's like it's important to get a sense of what the you know, students' individual strengths are, and like to allow them to you know, function and think independently. But at the same time, you know, obviously, if they need support, I mean, by all means, get that for them. It's like you have to walk a fine line, because you don't want to leave them out to dry, but you also don't want to make decisions for them and leave them completely unable to make decisions for themselves when they get older. So I mean, it's really tough. I can't stress that enough. You know, my parents struggled with that a lot. You know, they, I think, wanted me to have adequate support, and they kind of, I think, tried too hard at points in time that kind of just was intended to be supportive, but instead just ended up stifling me and inhibiting my my creativity and my skills. And I mean, it's really, if there was $1 million question, I mean, that would probably be it.
Yeah, so if anyone has $1 million for this question, like, you know, thank you. Yeah, definitely agree with your answer though. Jay wrote, I still struggle with this because they're my parents, but I'm adult. I usually win. And Jay, you still live with your parents, right? Yeah, so this question also has some special spiciness, I'll say.
Yeah, I feel the same too. I feel the same.
And you also live with your parents, right?
I do, yes.
Okay, so then, yeah, that's, yeah, I feel like just like high school and like young adulthood is just about not listening to what your parents tell you to do, just doing the exact opposite, and sometimes, usually, paying for paying for the mistakes you made, maybe a little later on. That's for sure. Yeah, but I think ultimately, like, you know, independence is important. You know, and sometimes that does cause discomfort for everyone involved, but ultimately, you know, in order to learn and grow, I think some ownership over our choices is an important one. But yeah, this question really does get into the root causes of a lot of the things we see, and it's an important one. So thanks for asking it. Cool. Okay. Well, let's jump to the next cool. I see there's another question. We're going to jump to the next question and then we'll loop back to this one. So the next question is, do you feel like your parents were supportive around your education? What about your teachers? And I know y'all have answered this a little, but let's see. Daniel, what about you?
Yes, I think they definitely were supportive. I mean, they tried. I mean, the good intentions were there. I mean, there really wasn't much of a question about that, unfortunately, because they couldn't get inside my head and I wasn't really old enough to speak up for myself. They often made decisions that were intended to help me, but in many cases they just hurt me and they made me slip even further into any funk that I may have been in. It was really difficult. I tried my best to articulate, but they wouldn't listen. I think maybe because they thought I wasn't able to know what I wanted, which was not true. I did know what I wanted. And so as a result, I started to think that maybe what I thought I wanted wasn't actually good, which, I mean, in most cases, I think we know what we want. And then people gaslight us into thinking that we don't know what we want. And so it really was, it was quite painful for me. But yes, overall, they did their best to be supportive and at times were actually quite overbearing and increased my anxiety, which does accompany autism and ADHD. It's a constant companion. And then as for my teachers, yeah, definitely early on, they knew about my disability and about my IEP, and they tried their best to be supportive. Again, there were inevitably communication problems that resulted from, my brain functioning differently than everybody else's. There were things I wanted that they couldn't get to me, or I couldn't say what I wanted. But in terms of whether they were supportive and they had the right intentions, I would say definitely yes.
Yeah, that's good to know. So some good, some bad. Which...
Yeah. Intentions were good, but the result,
If I can ask, when things like went wrong, why do you feel like they went wrong?
When things went wrong, misunderstandings.
Sure.
I think maybe they tried a little too hard to mainstream me into, the environment with the other kids. I think at times it was quite stressful for me, but they kind of were oblivious to that, or they sort of just decided that I should push through it without really, without really giving much regard to how I was feeling or how much this was, bothering me. And so it kind of felt like in many cases I didn't have a choice. And it was very painful at many points in time.
Yeah, and I think that last point especially is an important one. Like when we feel like our choices won't matter, it is painful, and it impacts how willing we are to advocate for ourselves later, or how willing we are to show initiative. So
pretty much, because we think our self-esteem suffers badly, and we just say, what, if I don't know what I want, and I'm just never going to advocate for myself or tell anybody what I want ever again, so no one will ever know how I'm feeling. That's the effect that it had on a lot of people and had on me for many years. But I eventually learned that the best thing I have to do is speak out, because it's how people are going to know and how we can get the best options available for me and for others in my type of situation.
Yeah, or in Jay's case, just run over them with your wheelchair if they don't listen. So Jay, what about you? I know you've had some experiences here.
Oh, Jay, you're on mute.
Yeah, sometimes her computer doesn't listen to her and she has to fight it.
Since my family is from Korea, my parents are not aware of American culture and its education system. So I needed to learn a lot of things for myself and became more independent than the average student. However, my transition specialist helped me to apply and get set up at Bellevue College, where I transferred from. My former transition specialist is the person responsible for opening another door in my life. At first, I wasn't sure if I could go to college and reach my dreams due to my disability, but I decided to face my challenges because of her. She always said I can do it, and she did everything she could to open a path for me. She encouraged and believed in me more than anyone. She even put me in a history class with the hardest teacher in the school because she wanted me to challenge myself. At the time, I didn't understand why she did this to me, but now I appreciate her for giving me an opportunity to challenge myself.
And if I remember right, you hate history, right? Like that's a thing. Yeah. Yeah, well, and that transition specialist was the one who advocated for you to get, your AAC communication device, right? So yeah, she had a big impact on like who you are and what you're doing now, that's for sure. That's important. And it really does seem like it just takes like the one teacher to really focus and make that positive change, for there to be a big difference when you don't think like any other teachers are going to do that, or you've never had a teacher do that. It is so easy to doubt yourself in the way that Daniel was talking about a little earlier. So yeah, good connection there. Devin, what about you?
For me, my parents have been super supportive, and they've been super supportive every step through my education journey, and they also advocated for me. They were definitely more involved in advocating for me in my rights. They definitely I was in Michigan at the time, so for my education journey, I was in Michigan when I was in sorry about this.
No worries, it's late, so I get it.
So basically I was in elementary in Michigan at Angel, and I had no problems. They were fully inclusive until we had no challenges. I had a teacher with me to help me guide me through, and I also had speech therapy as well, so that also really helped. So they were definitely super supportive and definitely did some advocating.
Yeah, that's good. And it definitely sounds like your parents are, in so many reasons, like why you're doing what you did today and why you had such a good experience where sometimes folks haven't. So that's definitely important. Cool. I think for me, yeah, I think they generally were like, they didn't necessarily know like what I really needed. And I think they struggled with that. And there was definitely some indecision going on. Like I think out of a desire to do no harm, but sometimes the inaction could cause harm as well when things weren't the best, or when, there was a dynamic going on that wasn't necessarily being talked about and needed to be addressed. Yeah, I think for my teachers, like, I think the bigger problem was there. Like, I, as far as I know, never had an autistic teacher. My teachers, as far as I could tell, were mostly non-disabled and couldn't really relate to me or why I did things the way I did, or like why I liked Pokemon so much, or like ducks, for example. And so, sometimes just like my neurodivergent quirks were an annoyance or a distraction or a disruption. And usually, they wouldn't necessarily listen to me when I was advocating for myself. And so I was just forced to like endure these really like hostile, like sensory and social environments in a lot of ways. And it just taught me, yeah, I gotta just hide my pain, because like whenever I advocate for myself or whenever my teachers try to help me, like things really aren't going to be better. They'll probably be worse when that happens. So just gotta just bear the pain. And like that has long-term really negative impacts on, the mental health, that's for sure. I did have one teacher, in particular, who was actually really supportive, and was really good at engaging me through my interests and through some of my quirks. And looking back, I realized he was bipolar, so he was able to use his own experiences as like a neurodivergent person, and knew what it was like to live, in a world where most people don't have a brain like yours. So I think that definitely helped. But other than and there were definitely some teachers who did really care and did have a lot of empathy, but many did not, and ultimately were just more frustrated than anything. Jay says, I hated my parents can't speak English, but it increased my advocacy skill and freedom. So yeah, from an early age, you had to do a lot of things for yourself. Yeah, and I know that's thinking about language access, there's a whole dynamic there as well that isn't often talked about. And in terms of thinking of how does language access impact IEP meetings or impact the experience of students with disabilities? We know, from the statistics that students from other marginalized, groups who have disabilities are much more likely to end up in jail, with the special education to prison pipeline at worst, or, they might not even be respected or have their rights followed, in many cases as well. So yeah, just disability is impacted by all the other identities someone holds as well. That's for sure. Cool. So let's see. Sunyat asked how much your parents involved advocating for you. Do your parents involved starting from elementary? What were the challenges in the process? And I feel like we answered a lot of that from the most recent planned question. Did any of you have anything you wanted to add based on Sunyat's question? And let me know if I pronounced that incorrectly. Anyone? Y'all can jump in if you want.
Yeah, I'd say they were relatively involved, from a pretty early age. I mean, as soon as I was diagnosed at age 3, and so they kind of sprung into action right away, getting in touch with everybody that they could. And I would have been in preschool about that time, and then from there, pretty much all the way up, they were very involved. And sometimes I feel like they may have been too involved. Kind of like I was saying earlier. In many cases, they kind of tried too hard, and it. I think they were, again, trying to be supportive, but instead it just increased my anxiety and my, just the extreme tension that, and the extreme stress that I was feeling. And so, yeah, I'd definitely say those were the main challenges in the process, and they made everything seem as if it was a life or death decision, even when it really wasn't. But was
that the case when you had to figure out what sandwich to have for lunch?
I guess, yeah. I mean, my parents kind of just have a way of carrying themselves where it's everything seems like an extremely consequential decision point. It's really, I think, is really aggravated my anxiety a lot, and that was much of what was involved in the advocation process. And then, but then they started to tail off a little bit as I got into middle school. And sorry. And sorry, Rachel. And
she's good. She's joking mostly.
Okay.
Somewhat.
Yeah, I know. I figured with the LOL, but
mostly joking. I mean, I see that in myself as a mom, so that I feel this is a little familiar, is what I'm saying.
Maybe it's why your son puts his sandwiches in your shoes.
Possibly
Maybe.
True. Yes.
But no, once we get to high school, it kind of tailed off a little bit. But they were definitely, I'd say, relatively involved, and sometimes I was a little embarrassed about it. I was self-conscious at many points. But yeah, basically to answer the question, they definitely were quite involved, and sometimes too involved. But obviously it came from a good place. I can't stress that enough. Sure. But it often sometimes doesn't always have the best impact that it should.
Right. Sure.
That you want it to, not that it should.
Right. It makes sense. We can't know what the long-term impacts of any decision are going to be. And yeah, when thinking about the blame and stress parents are under, especially parents with kids with disabilities, it makes sense there'd be that anxiety. But yeah, when it goes unchecked sometimes, yeah.
Hindsight's 2020.
Mm-hmm. Devin or Jay, do you have anything to add to this? Jay's like, nope.
Not really.
Okay, cool. Cool. Well, the final question we have planned is, so let's say like you have a magic wand, like this is a magic fork that disappears when I move it over here. So it's magical. Okay, we've got a magic pen. That's good. And let's say you can wave it and, okay, now the education system has changed. What does the education system look like now that you've waved the wand? Daniel, you had your wand out first after me, so you get to answer this next.
All right. Let's see. So I've waved my magic pen and changed the education system. In this hypothetical world, what would that new system look like? Well, very different from the current one to start, kind of like I was saying earlier, in response to the question of how high school could have better prepared me for life after graduation. I strongly believe the current school system in our world does not do a very good job of preparing students, really disabled or non-disabled, but particularly, disabled students from figuring out, what they want to be going forward. It kind of just gives them a bunch of skills that they probably won't need, going forward, such as, advanced math or the dates of the battles in the Civil War, and it's instead, you're not learning vital skills like how to file your taxes or how to look for a job or how to form healthy, lasting relationships. And obviously, I think, like, I talk to people about this all the time, both disabled and non-disabled, and they strongly agree with me on this. And we all share a sense of frustration. I think, obviously, as different as I may be from my neurotypical counterparts, that's a frustration that we all share. But definitely, it doesn't do a good job of helping students identify their individual strengths. I guess it could be important depending on what you do. But no, it's just like not doing a very good job of helping students, find their individual talents and their individual skills and getting to know themselves so that they can go forward and be as successful as possible. Instead, it kind of just leaves them out to dry. And then for those of us with, autism or ADHD or Down syndrome or any other disability, that effect is magnified 20-fold almost, because so many times we have these really special skills and these really special talents that never get brought out because of years of really persecution and disenfranchisement. And the system does virtually nothing to rectify that. And then we oftentimes end up in not very good situations. And a lot of that, I believe, is in large part due to the failures of the education system to ensure that people end up in the best place for them. And in turn, the health of our world, I feel, has suffered a lot. Consequently.
Sure.
So anyway, that's what I would change if I wave my magic pen, if that made sense.
Yeah, it does. I can definitely agree a lot with what you said. What about you, Devin?
For me, I would say definitely supporting their level of need is a big one, because definitely support their level of need and wants in the whole education system. Support their level of need is what we truly want in this education system, because I believe if we support their level of need, then we will be able to focus on their needs and wants. Their needs and wants in the education system, because my disability does not define me. So we need to have those moments of seeing our abilities and not our disability, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it reminds me of like Jay's story. So not always being defined solely through the lens of your disability is, not something anyone should have to go through. Jay, what about you? Do you have a similar answer to Devin?
If I could rebuild special education system, it would apply social model instead of medical model. It is an empowerment model that focuses on support and accommodations. Also, I would train the teachers how students should be challenged academically and learn with their peers in order to be successful. Special evaluators need not to judge students solely on their apparent disabilities when evaluating students.
Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely agree to that. Yeah, so for me, like my answer is similar to Daniel's. I feel like part of it is like, you know, there's a certain baseline level of knowledge we do need to know, but it feels like sometimes the schools, like at least the ones I went to, were too focused on, like in many cases, teaching many people like the same things rather than really focusing based off of our passions or our strengths. And so, you know, it doesn't necessarily lead to school being exciting or places where we like love to learn. We just have to go there because if we were unsupervised, you know, during those times, our parents wouldn't be able to work in some cases. So there's that. I think another thing I'll add is that, you know, there definitely needs to be more knowledge about disability culture within the curricula, and then also having more like outwardly disabled folks, or I guess invisibly disabled folks who are out about it as like teachers or, you know, staff. Like, you know, when we don't have anyone we can relate to or who acts like us or has our same experiences, you know, it's hard to really feel motivated or feel like our work's going to be worth anything in the long run. And, you know, it'll just feel like we're, you know, we're just going through the motions to please others who aren't like us. And that doesn't always end well for, you know, anyone involved. Yeah, so I'll rant about this if I don't stop now. And we've got a lot of other great questions in chat. So Kristen asked, how can we help our students be more social? Or I guess my question is, as adults, do you have friends? What do your friendships look like? Yeah, so my friendships don't look like the whole, oh, hey, how's it going? Let's talk about the sports and the weather and, you know, our shoes and all of that, like, or whatever non-autistic people talk about when they're together. I don't know. I've never been there. I think accepting that, like, yeah, socializing looks different based on your disability, or it just means like our friends are going to be, our friendships are going to look differently. You know, research shows for autistic people, we don't get the same dopamine rush that non-autistic people get when they're around their friends. We get that dopamine rush when we're doing things we enjoy. So it just means that, like, if we're forced to have friendships, you know, and develop quote unquote social skills in non-autistic ways, like, it's just not going to end up serving us, and it won't really make us happy. So yeah, you know, for me, like most of my friends are either autistic or neurodivergent or, you know, social workers themselves. So, you know, folks I can relate to who have shared experiences. It's hard for me to, you know, make friends or socialize with like not autistic people in really loud or noisy or crowded bars, or, you know, over brunch talking about, you know, the weather. What about the rest of you? Jay said, Kristen, I don't have long-term friends because other kids didn't understand my disability and they treated me as a baby. Also, I had paras all day with me. So yeah, they're paras. I spent most of my energy trying to really piss off the paras than I did actually learning anything. So there's that. And yeah, having paras around does make it difficult to have friends. What about Daniel or Devin? Do you have anything you want to add to this?
To the friendship question, yes,
Sure.
I do have long-term friendships, and I do have friends. But some of my friends, one of my best friends moved to England for college, but I still have contact with her. But I also have some small friends here as well, which is also really helpful, but I haven't been really in touch with them since I've been busy with work and stuff. And speaking at this panel too. So
I'm sorry this panel is keeping you from your social engagements.
No. It's just I'm fine doing panels. I'm in the evening, just not during the day.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What
Just
about you,
trying
Daniel?
to manage my schedule and stuff.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would definitely say my friendships for the until very recently were mostly with other neurotypicals, kind of going back to me just hiding my autism and masking, which now has two meanings because we're in the middle of a pandemic. But no, it's basically what happened was when I was younger, maybe, I don't know, 10 or 11 or 12, I wasn't really masking and I was kind of just being myself. But like people would often tell me like I was annoying or that I was not a pleasure to be around. They'd say really mean things about me behind my back and I would find out about them and it was borderline traumatic. And so I began to mask and I had more success that way. And I actually made some really good friendships in college. To my knowledge, most of them are neurotypical, although quite a few of them are quirky. And then towards the end of college and over the last year, so I did meet more friends that are neurodivergent like myself. And I find that we just, connect a lot better that way. And it's just, I don't have to be somebody I'm not. It's so much less effort. But yeah, no, definitely. I'd say I have friends, but it's quite difficult for many of us to have friends, particularly since many of us have been berated and bullied for much of our lives. And so we don't want to, I'm fortunate that I've had relatively supportive people around me. I mean, it's still been difficult, even with favorable circumstances. And the vast majority of us are just, we get completely nerfed, for lack of a better word. But in terms of helping students be more social, I'd probably say encourage connections with like-minded students or like-minded individuals that have, the same skills and passions as them, because there's a very good chance that that their skills and passions will probably translate into a job or something down the road. Like, for example, I was at Ryther last week. I've been volunteering there recently, and I was playing. We were doing like a board game group with a kid who has a passion for video game design. And so I was telling him that, or I was asking him, does he know anyone that is in video game design? And I think he said no. And I told him that definitely I think that he should look into that because he seems to be very good at it and very passionate about it. And I think his dad, I think possibly might work at Microsoft. And so definitely if your kid has a skill like that, maximize it and capitalize on it. Do not ignore it. Because it will likely lead to your kid being much, much, much more successful than if you just tell them that their interests don't matter, which is going to have very destructive consequences. So, because obviously socialization and opportunities down the road, they go hand in hand. And so I would definitely say increase connections in where your student has those skills.
Yep, that's definitely true. So the last question we have is, how can we help our kids when they get really, really upset to the extent that they start not just hitting, yelling, but harming themselves, like banging their head? Do you have any solutions for parents or caregivers to help in that situation? Yeah, I was there as a kid. I think the impact of shame has a huge, had a huge impact on like my experiences with meltdowns. But there were also like other like precipitating events, whether it be just like the sensory distress or just being exhausted from being in school all days, or just like, like I have a really strong memory, and that sometimes means that I'm just replaying some of the like traumas that happened to me like over and over. So I think my advice is just figure out like what's causing the meltdowns. If it's like environmental based, like working on that. If it's like trauma based, like definitely I think helping the kid find a therapist. And in the moment, if they're like hitting themselves or like banging their heads on walls, that probably is a moment to physically intervene. I usually don't advise that, but if like the kid's gonna hurt themselves or others like otherwise, then yeah, I think that is a moment you do have to intervene. Jay, Devin, Daniel, anything to add to that? Yeah, saying it's not our fault, that is very important.
Yeah, do not ever victim blame under any circumstances, because when we get upset, it's often because of things that are not in our control, and feeling like we've done something wrong is just going to exacerbate the shame response. And then we're going to start to doubt the validity of our own emotions, which happens to many of us as we get older, and it's very, very destructive when that happens. But in terms of what I would say, if your kids get really upset, first of all, kind of like I was just saying, help them recognize the validity of their problems, because it probably, even if what they believe is not correct, it likely stems from a real problem. And so help them see that. Try not to push back if possible, try to, allow them to go to a place that's peaceful, whether it's a mental place that's peaceful or a physical place. If there's something that they want to do to calm down, let them do it, as long as it's not anything dangerous or anything. Definitely try to de-escalate the situation. Do not escalate it. I know it's really hard not to escalate. My mom often did that many, many times, but please do not do that. It will not accomplish anything. And just try to calm things down. And it's, I've had that happen where I've been volunteering at Ryder. Sometimes things will get a bit tense with the kids. And I, if they say something, I don't really ever push back. I just let them take care of what they need to take care of. And I think that's the best approach to take in these kinds of situations.
Some good advice. Devin, do you have anything to okay, Devin says I agree with Jay. Well, cool. Nice, concise answer. So it is 8:32. So I just wanted to say I appreciate y'all for, all the panelists for being here, sharing your experiences with us. Thank you so much. I also wanted to thank all of the audience members as well. Great questions. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm glad y'all are here fighting the good fight. If you haven't taken the survey yet, that has been linked in chat 5 or 6 times. Please do so. It helps the county know that we're actually here doing. Hold on, 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3 times. That's like 5 or 6 practically. It helps the county know we are actually here doing work, and and not just sitting around in our office, all day watching YouTube videos. So thank you all so much. This was great. Do math. yeah, Jay, thanks. All right, bye all.
So much. Zach and Devin and Jay and Daniel, really appreciate your time tonight and sharing your experience with us. And yes, survey. And if you, those who want to stick around for caregiver kind of check-in, we are not going to go to a different Zoom this time tonight. You can just stay on and keep hanging out. And with the survey, that'll also be able to let us be able to leave it up in the chat a little longer too, because it will just be there. So. Thank you so much, Hillary and Scott, for being here. And I think Becca's already gone, but
thank you so much to the panel. The panel, it was so great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. We are down to just caregivers. So how's everybody feeling? Thoughts, reactions?
To be honest, I felt myself get emotional a couple of times. Like, it was really powerful, I think, to hear that adult perspective. That was powerful for me.
I totally agree. I thought that was an incredible presentation. I'm so grateful that they were able to come on and share their stories. It was really powerful for me. My kids are still pretty little, and it was really great to hear that perspective of folks who are out of the system now and grown.
I think it would be really amazing if there was something like that available for our kids, where they could ask questions themselves to adults with, similar abilities and experiences to them.
We might want to stop the recording. I'm sure you can edit it, but it might make it easier.
Good catch.